Hello, my name is Jamie Freiman. I'm a PhD student here at Rutgers University, and I'm going to explain to you a little bit about blockchain, what it is, how it works, how it can be integrated with smart contracts, and how it can impact the accounting and business ecosystem. Today I'm going to go over what blockchain is, how it works, what types of blockchain systems exist out there, some impacts that blockchain may have on business and accounting, how blockchain systems can be integrated with something known as smart contracts, some direct applications of this smart contract blockchain-enabled business environment, and give you some concluding thoughts on the future of this new technology. First, let me explain to you a little bit about what blockchain is. This is just a brief overview, keep that in mind. Blockchain is designed to be a decentralized ledger system, and that was developed originally for Bitcoin trading. Some key features of blockchain is that it was designed to be tamper resistant, robust to failures, pseudo-anonymous, and decentralized. Now, one important thing to note here is that Bitcoin and blockchain are two separate things. Bitcoin is a cyber currency that is designed to be spent amongst different parties, something similar to Ethereum or Litecoin or various other cyber currency networks. Blockchain, however, is the technology that was developed to support the trading of these cyber currencies. It is the same technology that is used in a whole host of different cyber currency networks, such as Ethereum or Bitcoin. So a little bit of background about what blockchain is and how it was developed. It was originally developed by Satoshi Nakamoto and published in October 2008 in a white paper. Now, one thing to note here is that there's no actual knowledge as to who Satoshi Nakamoto actually is. Now, a lot of research indicates that this might actually be different coders, and this is important to note when we're discussing the security of the blockchain system, because while most people believe that the blockchain system is highly secure and robust to all kinds of hacking attacks, without knowledge of who originally designed the system, we may be missing key insights or backdoors that may exist within the coding structure of the blockchain system. All of that aside, blockchain was originally designed to solve the problem of cyber currency double spending. What is this issue, you may ask? Let me explain that to you. The idea of double spending follows something like this. If I want to buy a bike from Alice for 10 Bitcoins, how does she actually know that I have those 10 Bitcoins to spend? Maybe my wallet says that I have 10 Bitcoins, but I already traded those Bitcoins to Bob 10 minutes ago and have no money to give to Alice. The blockchain system is designed to look through the ledger history and verify that I do in fact have those 10 Bitcoins to give to Alice for the bike. It enables trading in a low or zero trust environment. Maybe I've never met Alice before. Maybe I don't even know who Alice is. Maybe I don't even know her name is Alice. In these different situations, the blockchain system is developed to actually allow two parties who are unrelated with no knowledge of one another to trade in a secure manner. The system that is generated through blockchain ledger is robust to failure. So this distributed ledger system is robust enough that if any one node goes down or one person loses a record of the transactions, there's enough backup within all of the other nodes to reboot the system and continue trading without a flaw. The final feature of the blockchain system is that it is designed originally to operate without any centralized authority. That means that there is no central authority to determine who gets to mine blocks, who gets to operate on the networks, and who is designed to have access to what types of rights and responsibilities. All of these are distributed evenly throughout the network, and any node is allowed to access any of these rights or privileges. For example, if you wish, you can go home and download the entire blockchain ledger to your computer and view every single transaction that ever occurred. You may also wish to be a miner on the network. There's no restriction to who is allowed to mine blocks on the network or approve transactions through verification. A little bit of overview of what blockchain actually is. It is pretty much what it sounds like. That is a chronological chain of blocks where each block is linked through a hash to all previous blocks in the blockchain. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to explain how hashing actually works. But for now, all you need to know is that within each block, there is an identifying hash. And that hash contains information about every transaction within that block and links it to the hash of the previous block in the chain. That way, when you look at the blockchain as an entirety, the final block contains information about all the transactions within it, as well as the previous block, which also contains information about the transactions within that block and the previous block. And that way, the final hash in the chain actually contains information on every transaction within the blockchain system. Each transaction is also verified before being loaded onto the blockchain. That way, there's no issue of double spending, for instance. Next, all of this is distributed amongst all the nodes within the system. This is what we talk about when we mention a decentralized ledger system. Every node operating on the blockchain system has a complete record of every transaction that has occurred within the blockchain's history. That way, if there's any failure, the system can reboot via what's known as a consensus mechanism. A consensus mechanism is basically the idea that if a majority of the nodes agree that this is the correct version of the ledger, then the network will proceed using that ledger as the correct chain of events. Also, within this distributed ledger system, there's no one node that is any more or less powerful than any other node, i.e., every node can perform every task or any task that they wish to perform within the system. So how does this actually work? Well, first you have to understand what a block actually is. There's two different methods of determining what a block is within a blockchain system. The first method is by using a pre-specified number of transactions. For example, you may decide that every block should contain 10 transactions. That way, as the ledger system is progressing and operating, every 10 transactions, there'll be a cutoff, and those 10 transactions will be verified and mined as one block and added to the blockchain. The other method, which is more commonly used, is known as a pre-specified time interval. This doesn't matter how many transactions occur within the time window, but every so often a new block is generated. In the case of Bitcoin, all transactions that occur within 10 minutes are designated as one block. Once the 10-minute time window has finished occurring, that block goes into the mining stage and a new block begins to be generated. In this system, you may have one block that has 10 transactions, followed by another block that has 10,000 transactions, followed by a third block that may only have 500 transactions. In this way, the amount of information within each block varies, but the time intervals are at a regular period of time. Once a block is completed, i.e., once a block has reached its time interval transaction limit or transaction number limit, the block is cut off and all the transactions within the block must be verified by the mining nodes. The mining of a block is a three-stage process. The first stage is for the miners to verify all of the transactions within the block. This occurs by miners reviewing the history of the interacting wallets throughout the blockchain. Let's use an example for this. If I want to interact with Bob and he wants to sell me a motorbike for 10 bitcoins, The transaction of the motorbike coming to me is not recorded on the blockchain ledger system, nor is there any verification that he gave me the motorcycle. What is verified and recorded on the blockchain system is the transaction of 10 Bitcoins from me to him. When the transaction originally occurs, it will be placed in line for the next block to be cut off. Once the block cutoff occurs, the transaction must be verified. For this, the miners will look at my wallet, since I'm the one giving him the 10 Bitcoins, and examine the history of every transaction that my wallet has been involved in all the way back to its genesis. When it looks back at the history of my wallet's transaction, it's verifying that there is in fact 10 Bitcoins left in my wallet to be traded to Bob for the motorcycle. Once every transaction within the block is verified, the miners move on to the next two stages of blockchain mining. The next stage is for the blockchain algorithm itself to generate what's known as a problem string. The miners on the final stage generate a correct response hash that gets stuck to the block for its identification, based on the problem string. Now this process is a little bit complicated, so for now we're going to leave it at that, and the next couple of slides we'll dive in a little deeper onto how this hashing mechanism actually works. Before we look at how it actually works, let's overview a little bit about what hashing actually is and how it's used to identify information within the blockchain system. Now, as I mentioned before, this process is quite complicated. However, it's important to understand the basics so that you can better understand how the blockchain environment actually works and the security features that are built into the blockchain environment. So hashing is the method that is used for identifying blocks on the blockchain. Now, a hash is a combination of characters. Your characters could be letters or they could be numbers in any randomized order that is used to identify the information on the blockchain. Now, within each block, they are assigned a hash, as I mentioned before. By decoding that hash, users can actually determine information within the block as well as the hash information from the prior block in the blockchain. This linking mechanism of linking one block to the previous block to the previous block generates the idea of block chaining, i.e. each block being linked in one way or another to the previous block in the chain. In order for you to change any information within a previous block, it will result in a change in that block's hash, since the hash contains identifying information for all the transactions within that block. For example, if I am operating on a blockchain system that is 10 blocks long, and I want to go back and alter an information on the third block of the blockchain, I now have to alter the hash for that block and every subsequent hash in the blockchain. And I have to do this at a rate that is faster than the blockchain network that is loading new blocks onto that chain. The consensus mechanism is designed so that even if my computer is saying this is the new blockchain system that we are going to use, there's enough of the old system that is in agreement that says, hold on a minute, that's not the records that we have a different set of records, and since there's more of us than there are of you, we're going to continue proceed to using our records than using your records. Each of these hashes is generally designed to be computationally expensive. So the process of determining the hash for the block that contains information from within the block as well as the previous block is designed to take time to generate so that you can't generate blocks faster than the blockchain system itself, affording an added level of security. This hashing system is basically what gives the blockchain its tamper-proof nature. That's not present in every blockchain, but in a vast majority of blockchains that exist out there, including most cybercurrency blockchains. So how does hashing actually work? As I mentioned before, this can be a little complicated. So if it's difficult to understand, don't worry. But what I'm going to explain to you now is what is known as proof of work. There's all different types of hashing mechanisms that are out there that are being employed on different blockchain systems. But the most common method that is used, the same method that is used in Bitcoin trading, is known as proof of work. What happens within a proof of work system is that the blockchain algorithm generates what is known as a problem string. It is a string of characters. The miner has to determine the algorithm for adapting the problem string into the correct response string. Now, this algorithm is very, very, very difficult for the miners to actually come up with. So the way that the miners generate the correct response string is basically by brute force methodology. Now, brute force methodology means that the miners are just generating random strings and querying the algorithm saying, is this the correct string? 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 When the system identifies that this particular miner happened to guess the correct string first, it publishes the algorithm that it used to determine the response string from the problem string. All the other miners within the network then apply this algorithm to the problem string and determine if that first miner did in fact generate the correct response string. If it's determined that that miner did generate the correct response string by a majority of the miners on the network, then that miner is rewarded. The block is loaded onto the blockchain using the response string as an identifying hash, and the next block begins its mining phase. Now there's two important things to note here. Firstly, in this methodology, this is computationally expensive. If you are talking about a hash string of 26 or 48 characters, it can easily take a long time for the miners to determine what the correct response string is. This, as I mentioned before, enables part of the tamper-proof nature that is present within the blockchain environment. The other thing to note is that this problem string that is generated by the blockchain algorithm is variable. So for example, if I generated a problem string and it only took the miners 10 minutes to, if it takes the miners 10 minutes to solve, then the next problem string will be of a similar complexity. However, if I generate a problem string and it takes the miners 12 or 13 minutes to solve, which is outside the window of block limitation, then the next problem string that I generate will be made easier than the previous ones to try to fit to that 10-minute time frame window that I established for generating blocks. If the reverse happens and it takes the miners only 8 minutes to solve a problem, then the next problem will be generated to become harder so that it gets closer to the 10-minute time interval. That way, as computer power becomes stronger and computing power becomes cheaper, the blockchain algorithm will not become easier to crack. This computational expensive task prevents people from altering information earlier in the blockchain and outmining the system and getting to the end of the blockchain faster than new blocks are being added onto the chain. Now that's proof of work. Another method of doing this is proof of stake. In this case, there's not a multitude of miners. However, one miner is chosen from all the nodes based on the idea that they hold some sort of stake in the network. This stake in the network can be coins of currency, or any other stake that is determined by the miners, and it relies on this idea that the miner has such a large stake in the network's success that it is very unlikely that they will approve bad transactions or try to subvert the system. However, as I mentioned before, while proof of stake is used, and there are other ones that are used, proof of work is the most commonly used mining algorithm. Now that there's a little bit of explanation behind how the blockchain system is built and how it works, let's take a look at what types of blockchain systems are out there. There are three broad categories of blockchain systems. The most common type of blockchain system is a permissionless or public chain system. This is the type of system that is operated on almost every cybercurrency blockchain network, and it is by far and away the most common system out there. The permissionless or public blockchain system is designed so that all rights are open and every node on the network has equal rights. This type of system affords you all of the benefits that are present within the blockchain's designed environment. For example, there's no centralized authority since all rights are open to everyone. There is a distribution of ledgers amongst all the nodes, since every node in the system is allowed to pull any function within that system. As you move inward on this diagram, you will notice that the rights afforded to nodes become more and more restricted. While that proves some benefits of using blockchains in these more regulated environments, a lot of the benefits of developing the blockchain system that were originally designed as part of the blockchain system become lost as you move closer and closer towards the center of this diagram. So the second type of blockchain system is known as a permission chain system. In this system, the verification rights of transactions are what's restricted. So all nodes within the network may have access to a complete history or a complete version of the ledger transactions. However, verifying those transactions on new blocks are restricted to certain mining nodes. At this stage, you are developing a centralized authority because some centralized authority must determine who is given what rights. In this case, a centralized authority is determining what nodes get all other rights and what nodes have verification rights. So you are assigning roles within the system. The third, final, and most restrictive type of blockchain is in the center of the diagram. This is known as a private chain. In a private chain, all of the rights are restricted, and a centralized authority designates rights to each user within the system. Therefore, a lot of the benefits of blockchain are being lost in this stage of blockchain implementation. The benefit of using this type of blockchain is that a lot of information can be kept private from other nodes within the system. A centralized authority in this type of environment is determining what nodes have the rights to access information, what nodes have the rights to verify information, and what nodes have the rights to mine blocks onto the network. Now that you have a better understanding of what types of blockchain systems are out there, let's take a look at what type of impacts that blockchain is having on the accounting world. On a more broad level, the impacts of blockchain on society are being noticed in all different aspects of business. It's important to learn about this because even if blockchain is not implemented on an accounting level, accountants have to know how to interact with blockchain systems that are being used to support other roles within the business environment. Already, blockchain is being used to support a whole bunch of different roles within the business environment. This includes inventory tracking, tracking the ownership of rare goods, tracking and verifying product authenticity, and used as a transaction platform for some businesses. Let me explain to you a little bit about what this means. To track inventory, blockchain systems are being used by tagging the inventory with a unique identifier, almost as if the piece of inventory was a coin. That way, as that piece of inventory progresses through the supply chain from stage to stage, it is logged into the blockchain system, almost as if it is a transaction. For example, if your initial supplier moves the good to the next stage of the supply chain, it is almost as if a coin is moving from one wallet to the next wallet. All right? You can then see when supplier number 2 tries to move the inventory to supplier number 3, if in fact the correct number of inputs from supplier number 1 to supplier number 2 was used. How does this apply in a real world aspect? Well, this is being implemented by a business who's having trouble verifying the history of the goods that are being shipped to them. In this case, they were shipping powdered milk around the continent. When the powdered milk was originally moved out, there may have been 20 or 30 packets on the delivery crate. By the time it got to the end supplier, this number had grown to almost 50. So how was the business at the end of the supply chain able to determine which of those 50 products were the original 30 genuine products? By moving it through the blockchain system from start to finish, the end supplier is easily able to obtain the identity of the good packets versus the added packets. In order to track the ownership of rare goods, blockchain is a wonderful, wonderful system. One company is implementing this to track the ownership of gold. For example, if I want to trade a gold bar to Bob, normally I have to pay a huge amount of shipping and security costs for that gold bar to be transacted in terms of ownership, for me to get that bar to Bob. However, what this business is doing is it creates a vault with all of their gold bars within it. Each of these gold bars is tokenized or generated as a coin on their blockchain network. That way, when I buy a bar of gold from them, they input a whole bunch of these coins into my wallet. For example, one gold bar may be represented by 10 coins on their network. That way, if I try to trade that gold bar to Bob, instead of having to ship the gold bar around the country, I can just send him all of the coins within my wallet, and the bank now knows, or the business now knows, that those gold bars sitting in the vault no longer belong to me, but in fact belong to Bob, allowing us to trade the good without any increase in cost. Then, if Bob decides that he actually wants to hold the gold bar himself, he can cash out the coins to the business, and the business will ship him the gold bar at his leisure. You can see here how the ownership of rare goods tracking is a perfect scenario for implementing blockchain. As I mentioned before, this can be used to verify product authenticity. For example, if you are looking at diamonds and you don't wish to buy blood diamonds, which are illegal, then you can track the history of the diamond all the way back to where it was mined. It eliminates the introduction of counterfeit goods into the economy by tracking it with a coin in a separate, decentralized ledger system. As the transaction platform, it can be used in all different types of businesses. In this situation, you could be using a blockchain, in the case of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain system, as an actual transaction vehicle. For example, a business down the street may accept Bitcoins as a form of currency. Accountants and auditors need to know how to audit these systems or examine these systems properly to verify that the Bitcoins in that company's wallet are actually currency that the company is holding correctly. How does this actually impact accounting specifically? Well, there's several applications from blockchain that can be applied to accounting and more specifically auditing. The most prominent was developed by two people here at Rutgers, newly minted Professor Jun Dai and Professor Vazarhelyi, who published it in a paper back in 2017. This idea of triple entry accounting. Now, this doesn't mean that there'll be credits and debits and some third blockchain thing. What we mean by triple entry accounting is that there will be a third entry that is recorded. For example, if two businesses are interacting, currently, when one business sells a good to another business, business A sells a good to business B, business A is recording the transaction as a system of credits and debits. That is one entry. Company B is recording the mirror of the transaction in credits and debits on their books. That is entry number 2. And in the triple entry system, there will be a joint ledger system that is verifying these transactions as correct, as the third entry in the accounting system. This greatly benefits auditors who currently have to send out confirmation letters verifying the numbers of their auditee clients' books. So, in this situation, the blockchain would act as a self-confirming secure ledger system that exists between the two different businesses. As each transaction between the two businesses occurs, they are instantly verified by the businesses, and the transaction is recorded on the blockchain system. When the auditor from either of those two businesses wishes to come in and look at their client's books, instead of sending out a confirmation and possibly not getting any response, they're able to examine the blockchain ledger that exists between the two businesses and instantly verify that those transactions are correct. In this case, the ledger system would generate wallets for each of the two businesses, and a token would be transferred from one business to another every time there's a payment or an exchange of goods between the two businesses. As the block is loaded, as I mentioned, and the confirmation agreement between the two organizations occurs, it occurs in that moment, and when the auditor reviews the information, they know that all of that information on the blockchain system has already been confirmed as correct by both of the two parties. So that's one application to accounting. Another application is what's known as process mining or internal control logging. Since each block that's uploaded onto the blockchain ledger system is time-stamped, the auditors are able to follow a flow of each transaction as it's occurred chronologically. So for example, if a transaction is occurring between two different businesses, the timestamp is uploaded, every stage of that transaction will be uploaded onto separate blocks. This is also can be used for internal control logs. For example, in the purchase to pay process, there's several different stages that must occur before the final transfer of money for goods. First, a purchase order must be generated. Next, that purchase order must be approved. Next, the purchase order gets sent out. Next, once the goods are received, the recipient must verify that the correct amount of goods was in fact sent to them. All of these different stages of the process can be logged into the blockchain network system. For example, as a purchase order is approved, you now have access through an identifying feature exactly when that purchase order was approved. If the purchase order was denied, then it gets rejected and the purchase order must be regenerated. If it gets denied again, it must be regenerated. All through this process, there may be an identifying number with that transaction. You can then look up that identifying number within the system and see how many times that purchase order got rejected, which represents an inefficiency within the system. This allows auditors to come in and look at the system and see, are those internal controls being operated effectively and efficiently? Are the correct internal controls in place? and it will be logged in a completely tamper-proof format, because as we mentioned before, it is very difficult for you to go back in and alter an earlier block in the blockchain system without having to remine the entire blockchain that is subsequent to that transaction. Another application for accounting is that it may be used to share information with regulators, auditors, and investors in a continuous real-time format. If each of these parties are granted a node on the network, then this blockchain network of information can be shared with them in real time on a real-time basis. Basically, the auditors can sit in and audit you real time using the blockchain. If the business wishes to limit their exposure, then they can simply encrypt some of this information before uploading it onto the blockchain network, and therefore outside parties may not be able to see this type of information. We'll go into a little bit more detail about this later. Let's review some of what blockchain and accounting may actually mean. There are some additional benefits that were not mentioned, and some of which that were. For example, it's an easy system that may provide confirmation. It may provide a superior version of existence, and it will provide a reliable trail of audit evidence if enabled correctly, since those blocks are immutable. There are, however, some concerns that are generated through the use of blockchain networks. Are the networks built correctly? Now, one important feature to note here is, as I was explaining to you how blockchain systems worked, I mentioned that if you wish to alter an earlier block in the blockchain, you would have to be able to mine the rest of the blockchain system faster than the current blockchain system is mining blocks. Now, within public blockchain systems, this is virtually impossible, because you represent one computer's worth of power, and there may be 10, 11, 12, maybe even 100 other computers operating on the network trying to mine the network going forward. However, what happens if you have control of 51 out of those 100 computers on the network? Suddenly, you control more computing power than the rest of the network, and you can actually mine the network faster than the network is actually mining itself. This is what's known as a 51% attack, and it is the greatest weakness to a blockchain ledger system. In this security situation, 51% or more of the nodes on the network decide to change a record earlier on in the network, and they mount the attack by out-mining the network quicker than the remaining 49% of the network can handle. Now, in a public system, this is very difficult. Blockchain mining for Bitcoin currently uses 0.1% of global electricity. That means that you would have to use about 0.1% of global electricity or more to outmine the blockchain algorithm that is used for Bitcoin. However, if you're enabling this on a much smaller scale, for example, if my business has a handful of nodes and the regulators have a handful of nodes and the auditor has a node and one other business may have a node, then all of a sudden I can dedicate all of my business nodes to adapting the system and outmine the rest of the network. So this is what I mean where, is the network built correctly? Are the nodes distributed to a variety of different bodies in such a way that prevents a 51% attack? The next concern is that there may be potential flaws within the system. This is what I mentioned previously when I discussed the anonymity of Satoshi Nakamoto. There may be a backdoor to the blockchain system that is not known to the rest of the users. The final concern is whether or not the benefits are actually being realized by the company that is implementing the blockchain system. This is what I discussed when I examined the various different types of blockchain systems that are out there. The diagram that moves in towards the center. As you move in towards the center and regulate your blockchain more and more and more, you're losing some of these benefits, which may be the very benefits that the company is trying to employ when they deploy their blockchain system. The next thing we're going to go over is smart contracts. Now, smart contracts predate blockchain by almost a decade and a half. They were originally developed in the early 90s, and basically smart contracts are self-executing computer programs. They are called contracts because they were originally designed to replace paper contracts. Now, as smart contracts predated blockchain, there were some concerns because prior to blockchain, it was very easy for anyone to come in and reprogram the smart contract to do what they wanted it to do without leaving any trail of evidence. However, once you mount that smart contract onto a blockchain, you now have to alter the smart contract and then remine the block and then remine every block subsequent to that. So you enable the security of smart contracts through implementing them with a blockchain network. Now, once a smart contract is programmed, it's able to draw information from data within the blockchain system, or using oracles, it can examine data that is external to the blockchain. The nice thing about smart contracts and the incentive to employ them is that they will instantly be activated based on the relevant conditions within the smart contract. For example, let's look at an example. One smart contract application could be involved in a bank loan. Now we'll look at what a bank loan may traditionally look like and what it'll look like within the realm of smart contracts. For example, a bank may loan a business money under the condition that if their company's credit rating is altered, their interest rate may be variable to that. All right? Now, traditionally, there had to be a loan manager who would sit in the bank and every so often would look through the contract information, examine the business's information, and make that adjustment by hand. You can imagine that that is very time-consuming and very unreliable. Even if the bank manager catches the change in credit rating, the likelihood of them being able to catch that change in credit rating immediately and accurately is very, very low. A smart contract, however, can do this instantly. So the smart contract will be programmed to continuously monitor all of the credit rating agencies. The second a credit rating agency downgrades the credit rating of the business in question, then the smart contract will alter the interest rate and it will be changed the next time the interest payment is due. The smart contracts can actually take this one step further. You can actually link these smart contracts to the bank account of the issuing bank and the business client to automatically make those payments on time, just like you can set up automatic payments on your credit card. In this case, the second the adjustment is made, the next withdrawal from the client's bank account will be at the adjusted rate. Even further, if the credit rating is downgraded so much so that you have to call in the loan based on the conditions of the loan, the smart contract can automatically do that and notify all of the pertaining parties. So you can see how this is superior to the traditionally used system. So how does this come together with a blockchain? Well, you can set up these smart contracts to not only monitor outside credit ratings, but you can use it to monitor blockchain transactions. In this way, the smart contract, as the block is being mined and verified, the smart contract is examining all of those transactions within the block. If it finds a transaction that pertains to the smart contract is activated. Once it's activated, it automatically verifies the validity of the transaction and based on the criteria within the smart contract. If the smart contract approves the transactions, it'll be loaded onto the next block in the chain, but if not, the block will be rejected. All right. So one example of this, as I mentioned before, smart contracts don't actually have to involve contracts. They can perform any task that you like. However, one possible application to this may be that you design a smart contract that is constantly monitoring your inventory levels. Once your inventory of, say, timber falls below 10 tons of weight, then your smart contract will read that transaction that drops it below 10 tons and automatically activate the process of requesting a new order of timber from your supplier. That eliminates any middleman, that eliminates any purchase order requests. The smart contract will automatically generate the request, send it to the supplier, and the supplier can start sending the timber right away. This is one way in which the smart contracts can be used to monitor the incoming information on the blockchain system. Some other applications. Well, you can use this as an automated internal control check. For example, if you have to have an approval on any transaction over $100, then the smart contracts can verify all of the transactions coming into the blockchain and see whether or not that particular transaction has the required approval. If there's no approval of the transaction, the smart contract can bounce it out of the blockchain system and the transaction will not get approved and loaded onto the ledger. If there's the correct approvals, then it may proceed onto the block, get loaded onto the blockchain, and the blockchain can continue as intended. The next thing is it can be used to automatically monitor business processes. So as I mentioned before, if you're running low on inventory, you can use this to see if the inventory is running low and automatically generate the purchase request. Within the scope of accounting, you can operate this as a continuous audit analytic. So for example, if you as an auditor feel that your debt to equity ratio of your client should not exceed a certain amount, then you can set up an encrypted audit analytic contract to operate on their blockchain network and send you personal alerts anytime their ratio exceeds the particular threshold that you've established. So as I mentioned, these analytics can be encrypted by the auditors so the client doesn't actually know what the auditor is looking for, and they can operate on a continuous basis. So it will operate as it is examining every transaction that comes into the blockchain ledger, and the second that that ratio goes out of line, then an alert can be sent to the external nodes or the auditors within the chain, and the auditors can know right away without having to wait until their annual inspection of the audit. So how does this fit together with blockchain into the proposed environment? Well, the environment that I have proposed here takes place on the following two slides, and you can see it very clearly. First, a transaction event occurs. This could be any kind of transaction between the business and an external party or between two different departments within the business. Once this transaction is received by the blockchain system, the transactions are verified and the relevant smart contracts are activated. Then these smart contracts go to work. They examine the relative requirements for the transactions based on the coding within the smart contract, and then they examine the relevant information for those requirements. The smart contract then reaches one of two conclusions. Either the transaction is rejected and the parties are notified of the rejection, or the transaction is accepted. In the case of a transaction acceptance, then the parties may still be notified if that's what you wish, and the entry moves on to the blockchain mining portion of the blockchain system. So the entry is posted and it gets loaded onto the block. Once you have collected enough transactions to generate a block, the block is mined and added on to the blockchain system with the timestamp. This blockchain can then be shared with the auditors in real time, the management of the company who may want access to the information, any shareholders or board of executives that wish to access this information, or in the case especially of governmental accounting, it may be shared with the general public, or what we like to refer to as armchair auditors. Now, armchair auditors, or the general public, will now have an access to the complete record of all of the transactions so that they can audit the information however they see fit and notify the related parties if there are any issues found within the governmental blockchain system. Now, any great system does have its drawbacks, so let's discuss what some of these drawbacks may be. First of all, the blockchain system is very, very secure. As we mentioned before, the only real threat is that of a 51% attack. However, if your blockchain network is created properly, the likelihood of one of these 51% attacks is very, very low. However, they are also computationally demanding, which means that they will probably require a lot of computer power and they will require a lot of electricity use. Setting up these systems is also not cost-free. So there may be a large investment cost, and management may not understand all of the benefits associated with such an integrated system. Next, you have to keep in mind that compromising on security means that a lot of the benefits of blockchain may be lost. So if you start to designate different nodes, different responsibilities, if you start to assign a majority of the nodes of the network to be on the company's blockchain, to be nodes of the company, then you're compromising a lot of these benefits and security benefits. The next big disadvantage comes in the form of smart contracts. This has been the largest area of concern when you have had attacks on blockchain networks. The risk here is that a smart contract is only as good as it's programmed to be. So if there is a flaw in the smart contract's programming, there may be areas where hackers can take advantage of this flaw. For example, if your company employees realize that you are not allowed to have approval, you need approval for transactions over $100. But for some reason, when the smart contract sees an amount that is $1,000, it may only recognize it as $100, or it thinks that the comma is a decimal point, or something like that. Then the smart contract may not understand that those $1,000 transactions should actually require approval. And if people discover that this is a flaw within the smart contract, they'll start putting through fraudulent $1,000 transactions, and the smart contract may have no idea. So it's really only as good as it's programmed to be. And you need to test these smart contracts thoroughly. Next drawback is that these blockchain systems are built on consensus, and this is what I mentioned before. You need to have a balance of the nodes, because since it's built on consensus, you don't want the host company to have too many nodes on the network and be able to dictate the entirety of the network in whichever way they see fit, right? You're losing a lot of the security benefits in that regard. So you obviously need to build a network in such a way that all of the benefits are actually achieved. And then the final drawback is that if you're sharing this information in a public forum, especially corporate data, then you may run into issues of releasing this sensitive data into the public on behalf of the company. However, you can encrypt this information in such a way that the public may not have access to it. The only concern there is that no encryption scheme is perfect. As we all know, any encryption scheme can be broken. And even though it's encrypted now, if you release that information onto a public blockchain system and Joe Schmo down the street downloads the complete ledger, if in 6 or 7 years' time that encryption scheme is broken, then Joe Schmo can decrypt that information, and if there's information there that is still sensitive company information, he will have access to that information. So that's something that must be kept in mind when you're designing these networks. So here are some concluding thoughts. Basically, blockchain may provide some real benefits within a reporting and accounting paradigm. We've discussed some of that. You have an entire ledger system that is backed up and is shared with the auditors in real time and is robust to different types of failures. This field of blockchain implementation, it's new and it's ever evolving. So some of the applications we've gone over are very, very new that have only been implemented in the last 6 or 7 months. Some of the older ones are only even still a couple of years old. As I mentioned before, this technology has only existed for the last 10 years. And even though it's existed for 10 years, it's only been in the public spotlight for the last maybe 5 years. So it's a very, very new technology. There are probably a lot more realistic applications that have yet to be discovered, but it's important to note that this technology is still early on in the hype cycle, which means that there's a lot of optimism for the application of blockchain, but in reality, blockchain may not be as applicable as some people may currently think. However, it seems like blockchain is here to stay. Even if it doesn't catch on in every business aspect, even if it doesn't become completely integrated with accounting, it will still be integrated with some forms of business interaction. And therefore, it's very important for you as auditors and accountants to understand how blockchain and cybersecurity systems work in order to understand how to audit them correctly. Currently, there's almost no regulation on blockchain. In fact, I've spoken to auditors who have come and asked me how they should be auditing their blockchain systems. My response is, there's no regulation. Do what you want. And when I asked them how they were currently auditing these systems, they told me that they pretty much do what they want. Whatever the client's goals are is how they'll audit the blockchain system. Since, as I mentioned, there's no regulation. And if you start auditing these systems and you have no idea what you're looking at, then they could be pulling a fast one on you and you don't really understand what's happening. So it's very, very important for you to understand how blockchain systems work, because as I mentioned, even if it doesn't become part of every business aspect, at the very least, it's already integrated into supply chain management and inventory management. And it's very, very important for auditors and accountants to understand how this technology works. So that's my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day.